Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PracticingDentist.com podcast, Real World Dental Success, where each episode we're going to interview a successful practice owner, and they're going to give us their real world dentist-to-dentist tips, strategies, wisdom learned, mistakes made, and just general things that they want to share with us to help other dentists build their own practices and succeed in the business of dentistry. So thanks a lot and stay tuned. Hello, everyone. This episode, we are going to interview Dr. Greg Bichler, a successful dental practice owner in metro area of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Dr. Bichler is going to share with us his life story over his career of dentistry. He's now retired, but he's going to share his successes, his failures, and his keys to success. He built a great and highly profitable practice and really values building an awesome team and credits that with a lot of his success. So stay tuned and learn a lot, soak it in. He's got a lot of great things to share.
You know, I think that was one of your questions, looking back at my career, some of the important things. And I can just tell you something that's very important to me and personal, is the whole disability policy. There's a gentleman that lives very close to me, and he's a dentist, and he does not have disability and he's been practicing for 20 years. But I think he's finally on board with the idea. I mean, I'm 60 years old. I have a brother who's 65. He's practicing in California. He's extremely healthy. He's doing fantastic. And I've had to retire 2 years ago because both my hands and my neck went bad. And it's probably been, I don't want to say the most traumatic thing in my life, but it's really been unfortunate for my career because I had a fantastic business and I was great staff, great patients. But unfortunately, it didn't work out the way I'd hoped. But if I didn't have the disability, I'm not sure where I'd be.
Right.
And not only did I buy individual policies starting when I was 27 years old, also I was able, because I had 9 staff members that worked for me, I was able to buy a large group policy as well. And I also paid these premiums after tax. And that way I can derive the income, after tax. So I don't have to pay taxes on it. So
that was a good thing looking back. In your eyes, what did you love about it? How did you make it that way?
I think the number one thing is, we did have one of those, I don't want to say high-flying practices, but it was
a successful.
It was very,
yes. Yeah.
Yes. And I think the number one thing for me was, truthfully, the love and respect that my staff and my patients had for me and I had for them. Because each day when I went to work, it really wasn't about the money. The money fell into place, fortunately. If you do dentistry right, you're going to make a fantastic living.
Right.
But, if you walk out of there at the end of the day and your staff isn't really happy and the patients think that you're arrogant, and you're attempting to achieve the wrong dreams, I guess, in your life, then ultimately, I don't think you're going to be happy. But I think it really came down to, we all really cared a lot about each other.
Yeah.
It was important to always, even though we had a true friendship, it was important that they still, of course, understood that I was the boss and made the final call, because, that delineation is so important, and they want it to be that way. They don't want the doctor to be their friend. They want him to be their boss, but also to, be able to respect him and still come to him and ask him questions, sometimes on a personal level if need be. So.
And you talk about leadership. I've heard you say that before too. So it has to do with leadership and team building. It seems like you're big into that.
Without question. And so often you go to these courses and you'll listen to practice management people talk about teamwork and leadership, and I think many times in a lot of offices it's just a word, but your team really does build upon your actions. You have to be honest, you have to be sincere and genuine, you have to show respect to your hygienist, there's a situation that I'm very familiar with now because I was speaking to my old hygienist who was trying to tell me a little bit about how she has to wait 20, 25 minutes sometimes for an exam, and that's absolutely ridiculous. It's not fair to the patient, it's not fair to the staff members, it's not fair to the whole practice. So everything is about respect in the office and sincerity, I think, in terms of the
You probably built
leader.
patients that connected with that culture, right? So you kind of built that culture in your office, and I bet over the years, looking back, you'd see patients. Because that's what I noticed too, from taking over a couple of retiring dentist practices. They had a certain culture, that kind of ended up being similar to the culture that dentist had created with his staff, or he had himself. That type of personality almost carries over into the type of patients, the type of relationship with staff. So that's been huge for you. So the income falls into place when you learn to be efficient and practice the way you want, but those are parts of success.
You bet. There's so many levels. You learn it along the way. But some of the important things, continuing education, that's a no-brainer. You have to continue to go back to school every year and add new ideas. It stimulates your office, and when it's possible, bring as many of your staff members as possible. I know it's easy to do it on the cheap and think that you're going to pay them their time, you're going to pay extra for the course, but in the long run, it just makes it well worth it. You go back to the practice and you add a couple of new techniques or ideas, and in the long run, it just really makes a big difference. I was very fortunate. I had very little turnover in my office over the years, and I can't tell you how important it is to have that consistency. The patients so appreciate it. As a doctor, I appreciate it, and that's just really important. Hiring is absolutely, it's a key in your practice. And when I look back on some of the mistakes that I did make, I hired a couple of people based on a recommendation rather than doing my own due diligence. And I'll give you an example.
I did that too.
Okay, did you?
It turned out poorly.
Did it?
Yeah.
Yes. I had a business manager that worked for me for 5, 6, 7 years, I don't remember. And when she left, it was really disappointing. But she lined somebody up for me, and I just took her word that this was going to be the person that was going to work well in my practice. Well, as it turns out, I hired her pretty much sight unseen with a very cursory interview. It was fine for the first few months. It ended up turning into a disaster, and this person ended up not being who my business manager thought she was, and certainly not who I had hoped to hire. Similarly, I hired an assistant who I heard had fantastic Cerec ability, and she did, but I hired it based only on the fact that she was very qualified in Cerec, which I was attempting to grow. And it turns out she had a lot of emotional and personal problems, which carried over in the office, and that breakup was hard. But in general, I had staff that was with me a long time. So staff loyalty, or I should say staff lack of turnover, is so important for a practice.
Yeah, that's good. Looking back, that's a lesson learned.
Yes.
I think I learned that early on, in the first couple months of our practice, about the referrals from people that you think you can trust. But
yes.
Well, that's good. That's awesome. And then, so what do you think in looking back? So you were talking about CE when you said, I'm sure at CE you saw adding those new procedures and expanding your skills was key to being profitable,
Yes.
and enjoying dentistry. And also, what do you think were your favorite, looking back, best CE investments, the best investments you made in procedures or skills or learning?
Well, I don't say this from an arrogant standpoint, or at least I'm trying not to. We were one of the first practices to incorporate not only intraoral cameras, but also computers in each one of the rooms. And that just tells you, everybody has those now, but that goes back 20 some years. But I cannot tell you the value, in my opinion, of having an intraoral camera in your room. And there's so many practices that still don't have those. And I just think it's a world of dentistry. It makes a world of difference in your dentistry and presentation abilities. I can't emphasize that enough. And if I was starting a practice tomorrow, that's one of the first things that I would purchase. Another thing is in my practice at least, was having a treatment coordinator. We became very proficient with our intraoral camera, but it didn't make a lot of sense to me to spend more than several solid minutes with a patient in terms of treatment presentation. I felt if you could have a staff member that was very capable and communicate that, I think that's really important. So you could have this treatment coordinator that could sit with a patient. It could be 10 minutes, it could be 2 hours, and could go over the treatment necessary, we'll go over the x-rays, go over the financial policy, set up the appointment. And because it's not the dentist too, I think so often, 9 times out of 10, the patient would schedule, and I don't want to say be thrilled to have the work done, but it just seemed to be much more seamless that way. So I really believe those 2 things in particular were instrumental in our practice. And then also adding Cerec technology was quite important. And what I did was, we had some of the original Cerec equipment, but as we upgraded, I also had staff members learn how to draw the restorations and then create them, help seat them, so on and so forth. And that way I could be productive in another room. And that's where, depending on what you want for yourself, some dentists would prefer to do it all themselves and seat it, and that's just fine. It's everybody's prerogative. But for me, I thought it made more sense to prep it, get the picture, and let the assistant take it from there. And it worked very well to be very productive, and patients were responsive to that. So I worked actually with 3 assistants at times. And I can't, that's another point I can't emphasize enough. I have a friend of mine that, believe it or not, does not have an assistant. He likes a very, very obviously minimal staff, which to this day just kind of shocks me, surprises me. But I would always work with 2 or 3 assistants, and I just feel like we were so productive that way. It made a world of difference. They could help in the hygiene room. They could set up an extraction. Work with me in terms of topical anesthetic. If I'm in another room, it just really created a whole sense. Even though I was so busy working on a 5-op sometimes, it just seemed to settle everything. And again, it comes down to training. You have to train those staff members and find people that are motivated and happy to produce with you. And then also, in conjunction with produce, work out a bonus plan. And I'm not talking about paying $10 per staff member for an extra crown or something like that. That's foolish. I think looking at a real bonus plan based on production and collection, you have to come up with something that's going to work for both the doctor and the staff, a real win-win. So they appreciate this.
What was the most, how much, because I've heard too with bonus plans, it's like to incentivize people and help them buy in on the culture of the office, but also buy in on producing. You need to give them something that's going to be actually change their life. So,
right.
So how much, as an example, what was the most that a staff member would receive on your bonus plan? Like 10% of their salary, or like 50%?
Well, I can tell you, some of my hygienists did extremely well. I would say 30 to 50% sometimes, or their hourly based on their production. But again, absolutely, would you never want to produce or create or dictate any kind of dentistry that isn't absolutely necessary. So I just want to emphasize
You're not
that.
selling it.
Right.
You're ethically encouraging what patients need. Yeah. So how did your hygienist, like example, how did they increase production? Just were they part of treatment planning or helping to identify treatment? Or was it more that did they have assisted hygiene? Were they just doing more hygiene time? Or how did they actually implement it? Like,
I think, number one, if a new patient came in, we would start with the basics, which would include, of course, full mouth series and complete probings. All those things, of course, are necessary and morally and legally correct anyway, but that would give you a starting point. Then they would use the intraoral camera, and they'd put some pictures up on the screen and talk to the patients. Of course, they can't dictate treatment, but they give the patients a real good idea of what's happening. And if you really just look at a percentage of who has periodontal disease, and I don't remember exactly, it's probably 50% or more of our population. So when it works out in the schedule, many times they'll start some root planing that same day, or at least get a quadrant or two done, something like that, thereby be very, very productive. In addition to that, we always did fluoride treatments for our patients too, and we got in a real habit of that. Insurance doesn't pay that, whatever, that doesn't matter. And there was a charge for that. I think we charged $32, and because I believe the fluoride treatments are important for the adults. And I think it was $5 the hygienist received every time we did that. And I'll be honest, in our practice, and again, because I believe in those sort of things, some of the hygienists would really derive a nice extra amount of income for doing things that were very, very much appropriate of care. So, yes.
What about CE courses that you invested in or paid for? What was worth it? What wasn't? What did you like? What didn't?
I really enjoyed the Cerec courses, oral surgery courses. To be quite honest, my endo was lacking a little bit. It was one area that I just, for me to do a number 15 properly, tooth number 15, it turns out there's maybe 4 canals, something like that. I just, I did my best. I was more of an anterior and bicuspid.
You did what you enjoyed.
Yes, exactly. And I had a couple of friends that I referred the others out to. Other than that, I really enjoyed oral surgery, and I went to a number of continuing education classes in that.
Which ones were the best?
Oh, gee.
Tough to say. Were they just courses at
the university?
Yes. The university? You didn't go to like Spears or Dawson or Pankey?
I did do the Pankey, yes I did.
Okay.
However, the oral surgery class I took was at the University of Minnesota, and I also went to Marquette, my alma mater, to take one there. And I have a friend who's an oral surgeon. I spent some time in his office, and he was nice enough to just kind of show me a few techniques to speed things along. But I was also very careful about tackling things that, that were appropriate for my ability of care, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So
did what you enjoyed and what you were able to.
There are some things that you just don't want to take on, I guess, when you don't have the experience.
What about let's see, what about roadblocks or mistakes? So looking back, what were some things you talked about, the hiring and the staff? I'm sure that was a big one. What were some other ones? If you're a young dentist today, you could do it all over again, and you knew those mistakes, and you knew those kind of things that you had to learn the hard way, what are the things you wish someone would have told you from the beginning?
Well, I think it's such a balancing act when you get out of school, because you're still really learning how to speed up your technique. Exactly. I worked in Wisconsin for a year for a large group, and that helped me a lot. And if personally, I think if you get out of school, if you can do a residency, or you can work in a large group that has oral surgeons, a periodontist, so on and so forth, different specialties in there, I actually think it's kind of a nice idea just as a starting point. At least it worked for me real well. To be honest, it allowed me to make some mistakes and to learn quite a bit.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I did that in Wisconsin for about a year and a half, and then I moved up here and I started to practice from scratch. And I felt I was much more prepared. And then the other thing was, again, because I started practice from scratch with 2 operatories and grew it into 6, It
Over
was
how many years?
That would be probably over 10 years before I finally yes. Well, actually what happened was I worked in one strip mall for 6 years. We grew out of that space. I had 3 ops there. I moved to another, a little more sophisticated strip mall. Actually, it was more of an enclosed mall in Crystal, Minnesota. And I had 4 operatories there. We grew out of that space. I found a piece of land, and that's when we built this fabulous building that I worked in for about 14 years until I had to finish up. So.
And how did what was your key to growing as fast as you did from day one? I mean, was it location? I mean, looking back at practice growth as a new owner, do you think what was key? How did you do it? Was it location, demographic? Was it your marketing? Was it your team and referrals?
That's a great question, Cole. And I'm going to tell you this. One of my keys, I believe, is, of course, marketing is important. But once you bring that new patient in the door, you do everything you can to keep that patient, because you're going to spend a lot more money in marketing to attract patients. But if they come in and they're not happy, or they see reason to possibly move on to another practice, well, you've wasted such a great opportunity. So I think once you've attracted patients and they love your practice, they're going to be your ambassador. And I know you hear that in classes. Practice management people will tell you that, but it's absolutely true. So maintaining
that deep culture of internal
and they'll yes, exactly. They'll refer their family, their friends, and then it just kind of grows upon itself, and you save a lot of money in marketing that way. But having said that, we will do things such as send patients flowers. We'll make sure if they've had a long procedure or something like that. If a patient has had a difficult procedure, I'll always make sure I will call them either that night or the next day. Those sorts of things are very important. I will call patients with treatment plans if they don't have the time to come in. We have to do everything we can to again, like you said, Cole, present ourselves in our practices in a light that they don't see a reason why they would want to go to another practice.
They feel special, connected. That's great.
Absolutely.
So what were some roadblocks along the way? Like you mentioned staff.
Well, I think I think some of the biggest roadblocks were just hiring the wrong people. I'd have to say that for me, at least in my practice, that was probably the number one. I can tell you another point I guess I wanted to point out is how important your physical environment of your practice is. And again, you go to these practice management classes and they tell you the same thing, but you really need to step back, walk into your practice, see how it presents itself. Get rid of the old magazines, the old furniture. You really want to present yourself in a very professional light. People need to dress a certain way professionally. There can't be food behind the front desk. Certainly if any of your staff members smoke, that could be a real issue. And I've seen that before in practices. So how you present yourself from the moment that patient walks into your door is of such importance. Another thing I think is really important is having regular staff meetings. I can't emphasize that enough. In our practice, we had one scheduled once a month, 3 hours in the afternoon typically, and then we were done for the day. Frequently, I'd have like some food brought in or something like that, or maybe some unique entertainment just to make it kind of fun so staff members would look forward to it and it wasn't always drudgery. So I think that's really important, and you need to allow your staff members the opportunity to talk to your business manager and put something on the agenda if they feel it's very important, it needs to be discussed as a group, because believe me, there's stuff stuff that's comes up. And the other thing I thought was very important in our practice was having morning huddles. I can't emphasize that enough at any stage in your practice. And what we do is, say we start at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 7:40 we will all gather in the back room. Every one of the staff members will put a sign up in the front letting people know that we'll be right with them. But we'll spend at least 20 minutes going over the schedule, potential treatment plans, work that has not been accomplished, new patients coming in, personalities, potential toothaches, everything. And that way, it's just really amazing how that little bit of communication makes a difference in your day. Now, I have a friend of mine, I know for a fact he walks in at 5 to 8 and he sits down at 8 o'clock and he starts seeing his patients. And that's how he likes to do things. I think it's a big mistake. We kid about it. But I think the more preparation you have before you start the day will make a world of difference in your production and in your happiness throughout the day.
Well, I think you're a good example. I mean, what you're saying and preaching is quality practice systems over the years, and I think you obviously have carried that out, and your practice was a great example, evidenced by your Patterson article and being
Thank you.
kind of showcased. So anything else you can think of that you'd like to share with the listeners or whoever's listening to this article in the next years to come?
For me, I guess one thing I really want to emphasize, you get out of school and you're looking at a mountain of debt, 9 times out of 10 at least you are, unless you're fortunate, and you start to work and you're making some money and you're thinking, what do I pay off? What do I invest in? Do I go to continuing education? What do I do? What I'm trying to say is, from very early on in my life, I graduated when I was 26. At age of 27, I started saving every month, and I can't emphasize that enough to a young person. You have all these bills, and you think you don't have another dollar to your name to spend on something. But it's true. If you really listen to investment advisors, it's so important to start early and minimally put away 10% of your income one way or another, and then secondarily try and set up a retirement plan for your office, because that allows you to actually put away more money for yourself. And the sooner you start, I can't emphasize that enough. Fortunately, that's worked out for me, that philosophy, and you'll find with compound interest it really makes a big difference. So I just can't emphasize that enough. Don't wait until you're 35, 40, 50 years old and think that because you're going to sell your practice, all of a sudden you'll sell it for $500,000 and you'll have $500,000 and you'll be able to ride off in life. It doesn't work that way. Number one, you have tax ramifications and so on and so forth. So let your money work for you and invest early, every month and often. And it's as simple as buying a Vanguard Index 500 fund, something like that has very low costs. If you don't want to hire an advisor, that works very well. Of course, having disability is extremely important. And again, it's another expense, but it's a very, very important expense. Those are just a couple of things I wanted to add that I just think is really important early on. So,
I think it's great. Well, thanks for sharing.
You bet, Cole.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
All right, everyone, that concludes our interview with Dr. Bichler. Stay tuned for more real-world dental success interviews where we interview practicing dentists or dentists that have built great dental practices, where they share with us their strategies, tips, advice, and wisdom they learned over the years so that you can go out and build a practice of your own that you love.